Hello, my loves. So it is Saturday. I have no idea what day of the trip it is, but it is after I have completed 1 week of research at the RISD Museum. So I need to give you a recap on Friday's activities and a little bit of some stuff on Thursday because I kind of quickly breezed through Thursday. So let's see. Thursday I got done with all the Indian subcontinent textiles. And then Friday, I moved into various other things. At the very end of Thursday, I started looking at I can't tell you, a textile. And I can't tell you because it's part of a mystery. I'll explain that in a second. But then I continued looking at that on Friday, and then I started into various bark cloths. Painted bark cloths from the people of Samoa, Fiji, the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii, and other Polynesian nations and peoples. So this was very different, right? There are not threads in the typical sense that are woven. These are more like either bark that has been beaten out to thin it, kind of like if you take a steak, right, and you hammer it down until it's much, much thinner, but still all one piece. Sometimes that is what bark cloth is. It's just been beaten down, but other times it has been beaten down to such a degree that it becomes like a macerated pulp, as if you are going to create paper, right? And then you create basically paper or bark cloth garments, which are then painted for decoration, for rituals, for other important purposes. So the usual things of like S-twist and Z-twist and what is the weave don't really apply here. Although I did find one on Friday that was particularly interesting. It was day 5 of research at the RISD Museum. And it didn't look just macerated. It looked woven in some fashion, or that the decal, if they actually used some sort of decal. So, okay, I guess I have to rewind, right, and talk about some paper making. And it's actually particularly fortuitous that I took up paper making and taught a class on paper making because I understand really pretty intimately and have made paper, how paper making works. So basically, with paper making, if we're just completely taking it out of the context of wearable garments, paper making is where you take the pulp of a fibrous substance, usually a vegetation like a plant. It could be things like linen. Oh my goodness, of course I'm blanking now. Bamboo. Papyrus is an entirely different thing. Papyrus is actually just crisscrossed. That's a whole other story. But you basically take materials that can be broken down to such a degree that at a certain point they sort of fray and become such that they will catch on each other. So you create a macerated pulp. You then put it in water and create a slurry. And then from that slurry, you dunk in usually what's called a decal, and that is the frame that you're going to use. So if we use modern paper, in America, we use 8.5 by 11 paper. So your decal would be basically 8.5 by 11, a little bit larger because the edges would sort of feather. And that's just a way that paper is made, and then you cut it down to the 8.5 by 11. But you basically have your 8.5 by 11 plus decal. You put it into the slurry of water. You bring it up, right? The water drains out, and it leaves, if you've done it right and you've been able to sort of like have the magic touch and bring it up, the paper pulp is fairly evenly distributed and then rests on that decal. Now the decal itself is usually something. Back in the old days, it used to be like all these wires that were woven back and forth, up and down, kind of like a fabric would be woven. And then the pulp that didn't just fall through those wires is what would remain on top of the wires. And then that would become your paper. In a modern sense, they tend to use like basically the equivalent of like a screen window, if you know what I mean. So you use that screen window material, but it's even smaller just to make sure less falls through. And then boom, you've got your decal, you've got your paper. You then let your paper dry. You like take it out of the decal, you let it dry, you keep things to help keep it flat, and you squeeze out as much more of the water as you can, because the moment you bring up the paper, what will be your paper, from the slurry on your decal, about 80% of that is still water, right? So you've got to squeeze out all the water, let it dry, and then the resulting thing is that you have paper. So with some bark cloth, that is what happens, is they basically beat it down so much that they then, not so much through a decal per se, depending on the culture, they basically will layer all of these so finely beaten down bark sheets that they need to be kind of crisscrossed just so that they are thick enough to not have a bunch of things go through, etc. So the very first bark cloth that I looked at was that it was multiple barks sheets that had been stacked on top of each other. I would guess, by the way one end was fraying, it was probably 3 or 4 bark sheets that had been layered together. I don't know enough about it, so I need to do some more research to see if they do something to help keep it adhered, or if it's just simply like the maceration of the bark pulp that just kind of catches on each other, which is enough to keep it together. So that was the first one I looked at. But the second one I looked at looked like there were very, very even holes. There were holes between the vertical and diagonal strips of bark. Now, that could have been from some kind of decal surface that had like little prongs that were evenly distributed. This could have been done hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It could have been done modernly with those techniques and technologies. Or it is possible, but not probable, that the bark was woven in strips. I don't know. There's just not enough information readily available, so I need to do some more digging and research. But the part that is exciting to me, a little less about the construction of it and a little bit more about what they did with the bark cloth afterwards, is how do they decorate it? So there's definitely bark cloths that are hand painted with pigments, and then there are definitely bark cloths that have been stamped. I have looked at one yesterday. The third one I looked at yesterday was definitely stamped, which is really cool. That was also the one, though, that had like the little holes. And maybe I'll put up a picture here, bing, to show you what I mean about those holes. Excuse me. So the last one that I looked at was definitely, or the third one that I looked at. Second one? Sorry, I'm getting mixed up. But there were definitely like little holes, and there was definitely some that I saw that were hand painted and some that were stamped. And so, of course, this is interesting to me. When I was at LACMA in Los Angeles, no, it was at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, I was actually able to study 2 rubbing boards. And so basically what they do is, again, they take bark and then they take plant matter and they sew it onto these thin sheets of bark to create a raised surface, much like you would with any other stamp. And then they ink the surface. And unlike most stamps where the fabric is flat and then you stamp on top of it, okay, this would be like you would lay the rubbing board across your lap or across some flat surface, and then you would lay the fabric across it, and then you would sort of burnish the fabric to get all that ink to transfer, and then voila, you would have the rubbing board having transferred the ink onto the bark cloth. I don't believe I have yet seen a bark cloth with the rubbing board, but I have definitely seen it with some other manual hand stamp, I would guess. So that was very exciting, and a whole new world that I have to like learn about in terms of the construction and some of the practices. But it was really neat because there was somebody there who is who's visiting the study center who is particularly interested in indigenous and native processes, and she was like, "You're going to be studying bark cloths? Like nobody does that. That's so exciting!" And so I might be hooking up with a local university's indigenous group to share with them my findings, and then they can, if they want to, share with me whatever information they have about their various respective cultures, practices in the area, if they know anything and if they still or knew they at one point practiced it. So that was all that. A couple other updates. So I have my number one fan here in Rhode Island. He's the cutest little thing. His name is Ben, and he is a security guard. Oh, I shouldn't say where. I don't want to dox anybody. So he's a security guard somewhere. I kind of already doxed him. Anyways, hi Ben, if you're watching, and hopefully nobody will give him any grief. But he and I walked into the museum at one point together, and then later in that day, I was going to lunch, and he was walking out of the very place that I was going to lunch at, and we both kind of laughed, and I said, "Are you following me?" And then he's like, "Well, are you studying up in the study center?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "What are you doing up there? It looks fascinating." And at that point, I had no idea what he did at the museum. I just knew that he was somehow associated with the museum. So I explained to him kind of what I'm studying, and I told him kind of because he was asking all kinds of questions. He seemed very interested. So at this point, it really wasn't me just talking his ear off. Like, he was super fascinated. So we got into the discussion about Robert Ferrer and how most of his collection, or majority of his collection, is now deemed to be counterfeits, and how our whole body of knowledge is based off of a largely counterfeit collection. So that's part of what I'm doing, is trying to fix and give us a better understanding of printed textiles. And so we had a very nice conversation, lasted about 3 to 5 minutes, and then we went on our way and I went to lunch. And then the next day, which was yesterday, so that must have happened Thursday, yesterday, I went out to lunch and I came into the museum a different way than because I've kind of been like taking my opportunity to go into the museum different ways to see different things at the museum for even a few minutes on my breaks. Although I obviously want to spend as much time studying the textiles, but it's like, hey, while I'm at it, so I took this different way in, and I walk out of the elevator and there's Ben, and I was like, hey, how are you, Ben? And he goes, hi, good to see you. And I walk away, and there was like a whole class of kids, some kind of student trip in the museum. And so I heard like this like kind of shouting, not loud shouting, but like, hey, hey, hey. And so I thought it was the kids at first, and then I realized it was him, and I turned around and he goes, I have more questions for you. So we start talking again about it. He's like, so like, how is it that not a lot of people know about this? And I was like, I keep asking myself that same question. And part of that is it's my job now, right? Like, this is my personal crusade, is to make sure that people are better and more well educated on printed textiles from all genres, but particularly in the European medieval times. Most of the information is wrong. So, or we need to confirm most of the information because it was originally based on counterfeits. And they may have made good guesses, or they may have made guesses off of the things that were actually authentic. But until we actually go back and double check that data and that information, we just don't know. So I've been jokingly and lovingly referring to him as my number one fan now. So that was nice. I found out, speaking of fans, that my dad watches these videos. Hi, Dad. I was like, my dad and mom have always supported my stuff, and I would have guessed my mom would have been more likely to watch my stuff just because she would sit through stuff even if she didn't like care about it. I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, my dad doesn't know anything necessarily about textiles, but apparently he's been watching some of these videos, at least a couple of them, and I was like, wow, that's exciting. So hi, Dad. And speaking of my parents, I'm wearing my mom's shirt today. She left it on the bed, and when I left, I stole it from her. But I'm sure she wouldn't have minded that, and I know she definitely doesn't mind it today. So I wore it actually on Friday, and I threw it on again for this video because some exciting things have been happening behind the scenes at RISD, and one of the things that I can talk about is I am now going to be writing guest content for their social media outlets. The primary platforms that they're on are Instagram and Facebook. And so if you are friends with me on Facebook, you saw the precursor to the post that actually got posted by RISD. Again, I'll put it here. Ding. So now RISD is posting some of my content. On Monday, I will post both on my personal Facebook page as well as on RISD more of an explanation about what that textile is, what it was used for. and then a little bit of an introduction to the printed textiles project. And then we are going to establish some kind of posting schedule. It's not yet determined. I am going to pitch like monthly because although the only thing I care about at the RISD Museum mostly are the printed textiles. They have all kinds of things. So we obviously can't flood their content with stuff about printed textiles, but I'm going to pitch maybe like on a monthly basis. Here's another feature of something that was at the RISD Museum. And this was something that I had originally pitched to them when I pitched my grand, like, here's what I'd like to do. Here's what I'd like to come and study. And here's what I would like to come of it. There are other things that I would love to come from this that I still have fingers crossed, and we still have, like, I still have some demonstrating of viability and credibility to do. But I am feeling very good about the direction that we're going with things to increase information, education, awareness, etc. about printed textiles. So that is very exciting. What else happened? I think that's it. Oh, we talked about the RISD posts. I think that's it. So wrap up from week 1 is that I was able to get through 38 textiles of, originally I counted it as a 68, but it's probably more like 65 because one of the textiles is several different fragments and it was counted as like 4. So we'll say 38 out of 65 textiles, which is great. It's good pace that I've been working at. That leaves me 27 textiles, although again, one of those textiles is like 3 or 4 different pieces. But this is perfect because 2 of the textiles that I will be seeing on Monday are huge. One of them is called the Reynolds coverlet. It's from India, and it is meant as basically a wall hanging. And the other one is a 3-panel tent hanging called a kanat, Q-A-N-A-T. So Monday I will start until about 11. So for about an hour, I will be working on some of the other bark claws that I was working on. And then around 11 o'clock, because somebody actually needs to come to the study center that I'm in, we will be switching to another room, which can accommodate bigger cloths. And the first 2 that I'll be looking at are the kanat and the coverlet. So I'm really jazzed. But that will probably be all day. Right? Like I will probably spend all day on just those 2 textiles, taking measurements, taking pictures. You know, there's not a lot. I mean, once you establish what the weave is and the general thread density and, you know, warp to weft, you know, per centimeter threads, there's not that much more to count. But there will be a lot to like just look at every, because there's 3 entire, like when I was at LACMA, I got to see 1. If you remember, I took pictures. It was absolutely gorgeous. These are 3 in a row connected, like basically 3 individual masterpieces. So I am super jazzed for that. Oh, I forgot to tell you guys. I made a decision about next week. Well, the week after. I'm going to New York. I feel pretty good about this decision. Everybody that said, go home, you're tired, take a break, schedule it later in the year, you're not wrong. There wasn't a wrong decision to make. It wasn't bad advice. Particularly my cousin Charlene was like, I can tell how tired you are in your voice. And she's right. You are right. I am tired. But I just kept thinking 2 things. Number 1, the chances of getting 2 institutions at the same time, in the same week, in the same like proximity of each other to easily come together and schedule is a pain in the tuchus. So the fact that that came together and it was at the tail end of this trip and then my bosses said you can have the extra leave. And of course, I think my mom was involved, you know, up above. I was just like, you know what, as tired as I am, and I miss my family, I've got to take this opportunity. I am bummed about not being able to do the mediation training this time around, but I will send them an email to indicate I would love to be involved in the next one. So maybe next 6 months or 12 months, which is actually here. This was part of my decision calculus. Like I've got so much going on. I have a conference paper to present in May. I have a conference paper to present in July. I have to start getting some of this stuff out into publications. This is going to be a very, very busy year for me. And so I thought, you know what, maybe it is better to push off that volunteering for a little bit. So yes, I'm tired. And yes, I miss my family. And yes, poor Walter / Lothar is at home saying both, I want you home, come home, I miss you. And also I'm tired of being a single dad and, getting to work at 6 or getting up at 6:30 in the morning as opposed to 7 or 7:30 in the morning just to balance Oliver. But also simultaneously he's saying like, do it. Yes, we have some decisions to make otherwise, but in terms of like, do I get that textile or do I go to New York? And so while I still might get that textile, because we'll see how the bidding goes, I felt like my decision calculus for my whole life long has always been experiences are more important than things. That's my philosophy. If things are more important than experiences because they hold some special meaning to you, I'm not judging you. But I when I thought about that, I was like, ugh, as much as I want to own my own little piece of history, and may or may not still happen, the experience of getting to go to the Met and the Brooklyn Museum, I need to take it. So that's that decision. So I need to book hotel or Airbnb in the next couple of days. I will probably reach out to my New York friends to be like, okay, what areas do I stay in and what areas do I stay away from? And then... yeah. So, and then tomorrow I go to Quincy, Massachusetts, right near Boston, which is where the Harvard Art Museums, or Arts Museums. I don't know. It's weird. Like it's multiple museums that are now combined into one. Anyways, the Harvard Art Museums, we'll just say, are hosting an exhibit on terraz bands, essentially. And so I'm going there tomorrow from, I'm not going to say when. Ask her from 12 to 2. You got to be careful what you put out on the internet, but I don't think that I have any stalkers in Quincy, Massachusetts. So tomorrow I go from 12 to 2 to the museum, and I'm really excited to see that because I know for a fact there are several textiles that I wanted to see and study at some of these museums that are actually in this exhibit, because more than once, in fact, once was at I think the Textile Museum, and once was at Dumbarton Oaks on my list. They're like, by the way, this one's not available. I'm like, let me guess, it's at the Harvard Arts Museum. They're like, yeah, how'd you know? I'm like, because the curator over the Cleveland Museum of Arts told me that this exhibit was coming. And the reason that I'm so excited about this exhibit is not only will I be able to at least see some of these textiles that I wanted to at least get to study in person, so I'll ogle it from afar, but also my understanding is that there was some research that was done about the binders that were used to gild some of these terraz bands. And I believe that the research is written up in some fashion in the exhibition catalog. So my goal, my plan is, if it is available for purchase tomorrow when I go, I'm going to purchase that and then read the heck out of that, because I would love to see the scientific analysis versus what we know from a 10th century Egyptian manuscript, which talks about how do you make binders. So I would love to see what those two things say, if they're consistent, if they're different, because terraz bands were not just made in Egypt. In fact, they were frequently made, and many of the ones that are going to be shown tomorrow were made in Yemen. So maybe it'll be different. Maybe it'll be the same. Maybe it will be a chemical analysis of what fish glue and gum arabic and what other things are. I don't know. So pretty excited about that. If it's not for sale, I know that I saw on Amazon that it is later this month, or maybe next month, it'll be for sale. So I'll just buy it through there. But I'd love to get it in person and then have the leg up and tell you about that. So I think I have brought you up to speed on most things. I have 1 week left at RISD, and then the week after that, I will have 2 days off. So I'll drive from Rhode Island on Saturday of next week. And then Sunday and Monday are off. That's the other thing, Charlene. I'll be able to relax. So I'll have Sunday and Monday off. Then I'll do Tuesday and Wednesday at the Brooklyn Museum, and then Thursday and Friday at the Met. And then I'll be driving home. Probably I'll start driving home Friday night and then get home sometime Saturday or at the very least sometime early Sunday. So that's all that. It's exciting. Got extra trips, extra museums to go into. I'm now writing guest content for museums. I don't know how that happened. I do know how that happened because I pushed for it. I made it happen, and I'm glad that I made it happen. So I'll just take ownership of that. And my dad's watching my videos, so that's exciting. Hi, Dad. All right, I am not checking in with you guys at all tomorrow. I'm taking the day for myself. And then I may or may not check in Monday night, but if not, I will check in by Tuesday. We shall see. I think that's it. So, all right.